You are listening to episode number 35 of the Secondary Science Simplified podcast. You all are in for a treat today. Never have I ever been this excited to get an episode out to you. And I'm going to be honest, I was nervous to do this interview, but I knew that y'all needed to hear from this teacher because he is one of the best I have personally ever had. So it is my privilege and joy to share this interview I did with my very own high school chemistry teacher, Zach Matson. Mr. Matson, how can I call him anything different? Has a BS in chemistry, a BA in Spanish, a BA in computer science, and an MED from Valparaiso University. He also has an MS in engineering through Purdue University because he, quote unquote, thought it would be fun. He has been teaching since 2001 and is certified in secondary chemistry, physics, and mathematics. He spent 2 years teaching chemistry, math, and physics on the south side of Chicago at a small private school and has spent the last 19 years teaching all levels of chemistry on grade level honors, pre-engineering, which is a magnet program at our high school, and also AP. And he's done all of that at a public high school in Lexington, Kentucky, where I graduated. So yeah, he has an insane amount of teaching experience, and it shows in this episode. We cover so much. I originally reached out to him with a list of questions asking him to share advice for new chemistry teachers or teachers taking on AP chemistry for the first time. And we covered all of that on my list, so don't worry. But we also covered so much more. We talk about how he got into the field of education after working in a crime lab, about classroom management, dealing with students who are struggling for the first time academically in our classes, as well as the parents of those students, and all the things we teach our students besides our actual subject matter. He shares tips for doing demos and implementing lab days, how to utilize a teacher's aide, and what to do if you feel really incompetent in the courses you are assigned to teach. He shares how to build rapport with students, the importance of setting boundaries, and he offers advice to biology teachers for how we can best prepare our students going into chemistry if your course sequence is like mine and has them taking bio before chem. Lastly, if you teach AP anything, you need to listen to this episode for his tips because his AP chemistry tips really translate to any subject. I cannot emphasize enough the value I got from doing this interview. I'm so grateful for him taking time out of his summer to sit outside and away from his kids just to talk to me. I hope you enjoy his sarcasm and his self-deprecating humor too, because he had me laughing the entire interview. I truly cannot wait for y'all to hear from him. So let's just dive right into this epic episode with my very own chemistry teacher, Zach Matson. This is Secondary Science Simplified, a podcast for secondary science teachers who want to engage their students and simplify their lives. I'm Rebecca Joyner from It's Not Rocket Science. As a high school science teacher turned curriculum writer, I'm passionate about helping other science teachers love their jobs, serve their students, and do it all in only 40 hours a week. Are you ready to rock the time you spend in your classroom and actually have a life outside of it? You're in the right place, teacher friend. Let's get to today's episode. Okay, so hi, welcome.
Hello. Good morning, Rebecca.
I'm so excited. I've never been more nervous for an interview.
Whatever.
It's true. You're my teacher forever.
Yeah, whatever.
So I know you, but not everyone who listens to my podcast knows you. So why don't you tell them who you are and your teaching history and your experience and your background in education?
All right. Well, my name is Zach Matson. I teach at Lafayette Senior High School in Lexington, Kentucky. I started teaching in 2001. I was on the south side of Chicago for 2 years. I taught chemistry, physics, and math. And then since 2003, I've been down in Lexington. The school in Chicago was a private school. I don't remember how many kids were there, but we'll say somewhere between 100 and 600.
But different from Lafayette, which was what, 1,500?
So Lafayette now quite overcrowded at like 2,500 kids.
Wow.
So I'll save that rant for another time.
Didn't you work in a lab before?
Correct. I worked in a crime lab. We'll get into that in my second question.
Okay.
Am I allowed to let on that there's like a prompt question sheet?
Yes, you can let on that I gave you questions in advance, for
it's
sure.
It's good you did. And it's good that I was nervous about this podcast, so I wrote crap down.
I'm glad you did.
Yeah. So I graduated from Valparaiso University in 2000. I had a BS in chemistry and a BA in Spanish and computer science. And then I got my Master of Education in 2003. That was when I was working on the south side of Chicago. It was kind of like a Teach for America type thing.
Mm-hmm.
So 2 years, I got my master's degree and I worked for pennies, but it was a good experience. And then in 2010, I got a master in science from Purdue in engineering. So I kind of did that because I like engineering stuff and I thought I'd give it a try. It was hard.
Yeah. I've got 3 engineers in my family, so.
Yeah. And going into the graduate engineering coursework, having seen none of the undergraduate was stupid at best. So I logged some hours.
So you just did that for kicks and giggles because you like engineering.
That's a true story. I had to beg my way into the program because it was for engineers. So, and I did it. I was able to do it online, and that was kind of before it was a thing. Well, I mean, it was an online program, but it was before it was super popular.
Yeah.
So I'm at Lafayette now, Lexington, Kentucky. I teach like advanced chemistry and AP chemistry, and then there's this pre-engineering magnet chemistry. I have taught physical science, and I have threatened to teach the math classes. I'm not really allowed out of the department because I am offensive to people, it turns out.
Man, I love so many of the math teachers. Well, I guess most of my math teachers aren't there anymore.
Right. Possibly none of them. I don't know. So I know you're old, but you haven't aged, which is kind of disconcerting. I do have to give you a complaint. I know like there's actual content we need to cover, but like I want you to know that I have a major problem with your family, which is that I can't decide on a daily basis whether I like tea or naan better.
I know, it's hard.
Yeah.
So much personality in
I know.
tiny little bodies.
Exactly. So whatever you're doing it right. I'm jealous. I wish I could send my children to be raised by you.
Thanks. Well, you know that, everyone always talks to us about how like athletic T is and coordinated. And I'm like, it's very obvious he has 0 of my genes and that he's adopted because he got none of that from me.
Well, I do enjoy seeing your family popping up all the time in the stories and everything else.
Okay, wait, I got to know, did you ever use your Spanish?
No.
I was going to say, because I feel like Lafayette has a pretty high Hispanic population. Do you ever even just use it to chat with students or no?
You would hope so. Again, I'm like super neurotic and self-conscious about everything. So it's like, I would like to try to talk to some of my Hispanic students in Spanish in class, but then I'm like, but it's going to make them feel awkward or whatever if I'm talking to them differently than I'm talking to other kids. So again, it's a little bit of neurotic, but I don't know.
It's so interesting that you use those words to describe you, because that was not my impression of you at all.
Well, I think that's something to bring up too, is like, I'll bring it up maybe later, is like, I was trying to think last night, like what makes a good teacher or whatever. And I've watched a lot of new teachers come and go, and I've watched a lot of teachers who I respect and some who I have less respect for. And it's like the people who are really successful as teachers, and again, this is going to be offensive to some people, are generally very broken people. They're people pleasers, and they're constantly in their own head trying to improve things and make sure that everything goes perfectly. And that's kind of a broken thing. And I've said a lot recently, which is like, as you look at historical people who were like groundbreaking, if you're going to do something different, you have to think differently. So when I say broken, people take it insultingly, but it's like not thinking the way other people do, too much in your own head and worried about how you're perceived. So, and that's something that I think is like a big deal for me, is I'm too outwardly competent and people don't realize I'm a train wreck. So, all right. Well, I don't want, we could talk for 6.5 hours.
I know. I want to.
Yeah, I know.
Okay.
Well, this 10-part podcast.
10-part podcast. Okay. Well, let's move on to question 2. So
I'm not done with question 1. I've got freaking crap written down.
Okay. So what else do you want to tell us about your career history, teaching experience, background, and education?
Oh, what a cheap jab that you're highlighting those items. Anyway, I'm super old school in my teaching, which is I write everything down on the board. I'm not into PowerPoints and that kind of stuff. I don't feel for a quantitative subject that PowerPoint is really a way to go. And I will couch things with like, I speak in kind of absolutes, kind of as a joke to myself, and there's a lot of hyperbole. So people can not get offended when I say like, no PowerPoint. Admittedly, the pendulum should be in the middle with some PowerPoint perhaps. But I think a big part of learning is cognitive, seeing something being produced on the board, because your brain will fill in the gaps. If your brain can move faster than my hand can, and your brain fills in the gaps, and that's important for encoding. Plus, when they're writing it down, they have to parse it from their eyes through their brain to their hand, which is, I think, an important part of encoding. And then they're hearing it as well. So it's multimodal. And I think that if you look at educational research, which I don't, there's like a lot of research saying, oh yeah, this is actually a good idea to have people writing stuff down instead of just filling in the blanks, because it's better for encoding. And there's balances and whatever, like, yeah. So anyway, I'm super old school, which is not necessarily good. And the kids will be like, oh, you write so much. And it's like, yeah, I've written this 6 times today. And if I didn't think it was important for you, I wouldn't be doing it.
Well, I liked it because I liked that it felt like we could keep up with your pace, because like you said, you were writing it as a human, not a computer robot. And so then when we were writing it as a human, we could keep up.
Well, I think that's a really good point, is pacing. It really helps me set pacing, because I'm a fast talker and I'm even more disjointed in terms of what I'm saying. And so like it forces me to keep on task, and it forces me in terms of pacing. So I think that that's pretty important. And again, like there's pros and cons. Like people will say, oh, if they're taking notes, they don't remember it, or they aren't able to focus as much. I mean, there's a balance, but like I'm pretty old school in that regard. I've got a YouTube channel. I'm not like trying to sell that out, but I started that shockingly right before the pandemic, and not for any, for
your students.
Well, not for my students. It's a long story. But anyway, I don't know how many videos I got, like 150-ish. And they're basically like pieces of lessons, and then like cohesive lessons in terms of like stoichiometry. I've got like, I don't know, we'll say 17 videos on that. And it starts out with just the introduction stuff and works all the way through. My long-term goal was to kind of then do corollary videos for new teachers or teachers, saying like, here are the things I highlight and why. I can see your like eyes are open. Yeah, it'd be nice if I ever did that. But so anyway, that's on the long-term docket, but I think I've got another 150 videos or so, but it ended up to do more than that. But then COVID rolled around, and it was like, I could always use that as a supplement and be like, hey, look at this. And I'm, again, very conscientious about not saying to kids like, oh, you have to learn it from this. In fact, I try and mention it as little as possible. But if they need supplemental help, I'll be like, hey, here's more examples of what we did, or here's the lesson material from when you were gone, or check out Khan Academy or whatever. There's a lot of good resources. So I'm glad I have that.
I want the link to that so I can share it. But also, that's funny you said that, because I did the same thing. I recorded all my lectures like back in 2017, 2018, because I taught at this tiny private school, and I had students who played 14 sports and they were always gone.
Right.
And so I just started doing it for them, because I was like, you got to catch up. And then it was awesome, because when the pandemic hit, I was like, I already did all of this stuff. Right.
So I agree. It ended up serendipitous. And like I said, kind of long-term, I'd like to fill in that other stuff, although I've been slacking on it lately. So that's good to hear. I'm glad that you had a little serendipity as well in that regard. Anyway, the YouTube channel is just Matson Chemistry. So it's easy to find.
I love
it. All right. I still have to hit topic 1 and finish this up, because I think this is the most important part.
Okay.
Which is like, I've been doing this for 20 some years teaching. And something I've realized looking at new teachers, and then like learning things on my own outside, about like racing cars or whatever. When you're starting out, you think about very different things than when you're 20 years in. And it's like the nuances and the intricacies that I care about, people shouldn't care about. So like one of the notes I had made specifically that I highlighted was like, ignore everything I say. And I tell people this, I tell new teachers, it's like, look, all these things I'm about to say don't matter. All right. There's really only 2 things that matter, especially starting out, which is like focus on 1 or 2 things and trying to improve at a time. One of which being make it through the year. All right. And you'll hear me say this again. And I know this type of thing is offensive to people. You're going to suck. When you start a topic or a content area, or even at a new school, you're going to suck. And that's life. And the reality is no one cares. All right. So like when I'm looking at, spacing or font sizes on a handout I'm going to give a kid, that shouldn't even remotely be on your radar. No one cares. Like you should be focused on, I'm going to make it through today. And it's tough. And maybe it's not going to go the way I want it to, but mental note, that can be fixed later. And I think it's really important to realize, and this is hyperbole a little bit, no one cares and nothing matters. All right. Like if you only cover 80% of the material over the course of the year, or if you cover a topic poorly one day, you're a blip on these kids' radar in terms of content. Like they got 8 classes times, whatever amount of information. And admittedly, I'll tell my kids, like, you're going to get more information in here than all of your other classes combined. which is true. It ends up being true. But like, I mean, they get enough. It's a blip on their radar. One little hiccup or not being perfect. Like if you're there and if you're sincere and trying to get the stuff in, it's not going to matter. Your job is to get through the year. It's not going to be perfect. You're going to suck. So I don't know if you want to talk about that now or later.
No, I think that's really important. And I felt that when I taught AP Bio for the first time, I told the students, I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. You're going to ask questions. I'm going to have no clue. And I told them, I said, I'm pulling stuff off the internet like the day before class. And so, these procedures are terrible. I didn't write them, but we're going to do our best and go through it. And they appreciated that authenticity so much. Like we were learning it together.
I agree. And there's always like a little danger in that, which is like, oh, they don't know anything. But I guarantee you didn't do it as long as you're competent about it. And you're like you said, authentic, that like, I'm using this. This is our first or second time through, whatever. And I do want to mention, like, did you take AP Chem? Because if you did, it would have been okay.
Yeah, with you. I cried. You don't remember? I felt like I cried so much.
Okay, that's distressing and sad. Don't worry, that'll keep me up tonight. But that had to have been one of my first years teaching AP Chem. And like when I had you for chemistry, that was one of my first years, probably pre-engineering chemistry, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
Like at that time. And if you were to think back, you wouldn't be like, wow, this guy was a hack and he did a horrible job. However, I know I was a hack and I did a horrible job. And so hopefully that like you having had me for class, you can verify to people, like, I know for a fact it was horrible delivery, horrible comprehension on my part, horrible everything. But like looking back on it, do you think, wow, what a hack?
No, I thought the content was really hard, but I always thought you were a great teacher. And I was shocked I even got a 4 on the exam. I thought I wasn't going to pass the exam, but that's when I always told my AP students, like, no one knows this. This is hard for everybody. And the scale is so whack. Like I left free response questions blank and I got a 4. I was like, that's how scaled the grading is on this thing.
Right. And that's something we can talk about when we get to the AP question, because I know you'll want a laser-like focus. But I do want to say for the people listening in, like all of these little nuances, ignore them. They're not going to matter. Your job's to get through the year. It's going to be fine. If you're listening to a podcast like this, you care enough that you're going to be conscientious and it's going to be fine. Get through the year. Don't obsess about crappy days because you suck and it's going to suck. Right. Yeah. All right. Well, that's what I wanted to sneak in there. I always make this thing that I say to the kids too, or new teachers. It's like, there's this expression, you can't see the forest through the trees because like you're focused on what's in front of you. For me, it's reached the point where it's like the cells, the plant cells. I can't see the forest through the plant cells in the trees or the atoms in the plant cells. Like that's the level of neuroses I've reached. So ignore everything I say. So
but also keep listening because I love everything you're saying and I'm grateful you're here. Okay. So will you answer my second question now? Because I really want to know why you decided to do this and be a science teacher, because I definitely remember you telling us how you used to work in a lab. And I remember thinking when I became a teacher, I wish I'd worked in a lab because I don't feel like I know enough safety stuff to handle these chemicals.
Well, I will say this with that. And just as a little side note, nobody knows anything. All right. Like in terms of, and you know this because you've taught, like everything I know, I learned from teaching it. You know what I mean? You don't, whatever you learned in college is gone. That's like gone instantly. Like all of the content I know because I taught it. And so when you say like lab safety or whatever, it's like, yeah, I learned that on the fly. So that's how that goes. So keep that in mind, new teachers too. It's like, that doesn't excuse you from being negligent, but you certainly shouldn't feel self-conscious about not knowing it because nobody does when they start out. Anyway, like I'm just going to declare up front, had to have been some form of divine intervention. I was in college. I was originally intending to go to graduate school for chemistry because that's what people with chemistry degrees do, which would have then plunked me in a lab. So I tried to get, like, I didn't know what any of these things were. I'm like super oblivious, but I was like, oh, a co-op or an internship or something. So I mentioned it to one of my advisors and he's like, well, there's this potential opportunity at a forensics lab. And so this was all pre these TV shows, CSI and everything. And I was like, well, what's a forensics lab? I don't even know. Like that's not even hyperbole. I had no idea.
Yeah.
So, and he's like, well, kind of like a crime lab or something, I think he said. So I ended up going in and I tell this story to my students. So I went to this place and like I borrowed somebody's car to get there. I borrowed like a suit coat and a tie and everything. And then they plunked me down in this library for the interview. And then in walks who I will describe as cranky Santa Claus, because the guy was like, 5'10", 380 pounds, big beard. And he talked like he had a throat full of gravel. And like, never have I been so intimidated in my life, period, because I sat through that interview and he asked me questions over just like boom, boom, boom. I knew zero of them. Like, it got so frustrating. And it was like 2 hours. So he'd be like, oh, you do some instrumentation in lab. Like what? Oh, gas chromatograph. Use it. What model?
I don't know.
So there were a lot of I don't knows. And at one point, and this is like serendipitous. Again, I've said that word a lot, but it's true. He had said to me, like, if you could boil all of chemistry down to one thing that a high school student could understand, what would it be? To which I responded, I don't know, because I didn't know. But a friend of mine who's now a college professor in organic chemistry had told me at some point, he's like, oh, this is all electronegativity. So I always cite my sources. So I told this guy, I was like, I don't know, but my friend told me electronegativity. And then there's like, a 5 Mississippi pause. And he's like, good answer. And I was like, whoa. And then he's like, why? And then I was like,
gonna tell you.
Back to the I don't knows. But like, I tell my kids now when we're learning periodic trends and stuff, like that is, if he asked me that right now, it'd be the same answer. Maybe not, definitely not for the same reasons, but it's like, wow, the answer is electronegativity, or it's a pretty darn good answer. So I worked there for a couple summers and a semester, and I realized that I don't really like lab work. It's not for me in terms of like, while I am kind of introverted and I would prefer to not be around people, it does me good to be around people. And I had like worked at school in like Saturday makeup lab for kids who missed lab. And so I had talked to this guy a lot about that. By the way, he was an awesome guy, Michael Capeless, and he passed a couple of years ago, but smartest guy I've ever met by orders of magnitude. And like his intensity and the way he questioned me and everything else, he wasn't trying to bring me down. He was just like, it's this intensity of he wants to know, and he's going to get this bone and chew on it because that's what he does. And I've kind of ended up that way too a little bit. But so then, he was like, oh, what do you want to do? And I had looked at like the ATF and the FBI because I'd been working in a crime lab. And they said something which is kind of interesting, which is, you shouldn't do that. You being me, not necessarily everyone, because it paints how you look at things. When you're dealing with criminals all the time, that's what you start to see, or when you're dealing with people who are trying to beat the law or whatever. And so we had talked about like, what did I like to do? And I liked working with these people, teaching them on these makeup labs on Saturday. And so that kind of was in limbo. And then my wife, who also went to Valparaiso University, I graduated and I was kind of staring off into space, and she got like a postcard for a program that was starting up, this LEAPS program, which is, like I said, kind of like Teach for America. And so then that was in like December or something. And then I started in January. I was like, oh, it's this opportunity for a master's, and I don't have to like start over in school, and I can be working while I'm doing it. So like, I really feel that that's a lot of divine intervention, you might say, of things coming together, which is this program started as I was looking for something to do. And I do want to say, very much related to this, many years ago, I don't know, like everything's a blur at this point, but I'm just going to say 10 years ago, the Valpo chemistry department had asked me to come back because they were starting a program where they were trying to get higher achieving students on the education pathway for science and everything. And I'll be perfectly honest, which is they're like, oh, can you come and speak to this as someone who was like pretty high achieving, who went on to teach? And like, my immediate thought was, no, these poor kids, I'm betraying them by like, I feel bad if one of these kids goes into education because it's so much less than they could have done. Like literally, I was like, what am I going to say at this thing?
You
but then
always told me not to be a teacher. You kept telling me
saying that, but
yes, you did. Because I was pre-med at first in college. And then I came home one summer and I told you I was switching education. You were like, don't do it.
As you said it, I cringed. I want you to know, like, I believe your story for sure. So I had to write this speech or whatever. And what I came up with was this, which is like, people like me, when you major in science, like the standard pathway is to go to graduate school and then work in a lab, or go straight to working in a lab, especially if you're like someone who does well and is high achieving. And then it was like, but wait, that doesn't suit everybody. Some people, and again, I'm not saying that people who work in a lab can't be more social, but like some people are better suited for other areas. And maybe one of those areas is education. In fact, maybe we need some of our top people in education on the front lines because they're the ones who recruit the next round. So it was like, oh crap, we really do need these top achieving students to go into education because A, it may be better suited for their talents, and B, they're recruiting the next round. And I'm going to toss in C, which is maybe B and a half. You don't sit in a classroom with someone who was, C tier student and think to yourself, wow, this person's great. I want to be like them, right? It's the top tier people who make you want to say, this is great. I want to be like them, or I am interested in this because this person is, really good at what they do, or they know a lot. They impress me. I want to be like them. So I kind of have to tell myself that when I hear amazing students like you say, oh, I'm going to go into education. And my first mental response is, well, that's a waste. And then I tell myself, but it's people like you who make people want to go into science. So high five.
Thanks.
So that's my second question, which is why I become a secondary science teacher? Accident, serendipity, divine intervention. Oh, and let me knock out the third one right away.
Yeah. Why do you stay?
Why do I stay? Number one, I'm a robot, and consistency and stability, I'm not good with change. So I'm just going to toss that out there. So momentum. And also the students, I think it's going to be hard when I retire not to have that interaction with people who are young and full of life and everything else and hungry. So I don't know. That's so short answer, momentum and the students. I really like working with the students.
Okay. So, the goal of this episode is specifically for teachers who are new to chemistry. So
I know,
really thinking about people like me who are more biology minded, if we got thrown into teaching chem. So What would you tell me?
So the first thing I'm going to say is one of my greatest weaknesses, which is use existing material. Everything is out there at this point. Maybe they can hit up your site or something. Everything's out there. There's no reason to have to create anything from scratch. And that doesn't mean improvise or follow someone's exact mimicking what they've done. But it does mean that's something that you don't have to have on your plate, especially starting out. Stuff exists. You're going to suck, whatever. Maybe some of these activities aren't the greatest, but your job is staying alive. You can't help other people. They always talk about emergency situations. You can't help other people if you're not alive, right? Yeah. So
put your oxygen mask on first.
That's right. Exactly. So I think that using existing material, I wish I could do that, or I would do that. But again, I'm a little neurotic. I make stuff from scratch. And then now in my old age, I'm super cranky when people steal it and don't cite me. So that's one of the reasons I did those videos. But I'll give it away. Just freaking tell people where it came from,
Yeah.
So, and, I put as my notes on this in terms of mistakes to avoid. I will say this as a joke, but also not as a joke. I think it's important. One of the things to do a lot of is demonstrations in labs. And I need to step up my game on that. As I've gotten older, it's these things become passé. And while it may be incredible for them, it's just meh. So I've been working on trying to work that back in. But labs and demos are, I think, a huge deal. And you could work in demos all the time. Just be careful. There are demos that always end up in the news, the ones where it's especially flame tests with different salts, and they put it in little petri dishes of methanol or ethanol, and then somehow the whole room starts on fire and a bunch of kids die. So you have to be careful. You have to treat things with respect.
I'm trying not to laugh that you said kids die, because it's not funny, but
I know. Well, again, it's a little bit of hyperbole. I don't think but actually kids have gotten burned and stuff. And I've had administrators come and be like, after seeing something on the news, oh my gosh, do you do this demo? And I'm like, well, not like that. So be careful, treat these things with respect. There's a certain amount of seeming carefree and being glib that I think is showmanship. And I think that's important, but also in the back of your mind, making sure this can't go wrong. And there's only really one demo that I do that makes me nervous because, I actually kind of know what goes on behind the scenes. And that's the flaming gummy bear or whatever where you heat up potassium chlorate in a test tube, and it decomposes to potassium chlorate, and decomposes to potassium chloride, liquid potassium chloride, and oxygen gas. And then you throw a gummy bear or jelly.
Yeah, I did it when I taught physical science.
Yes, and that's a super dangerous demo. Oh, good. See, yeah, that's a super dangerous demo because if there's any carbon or other stuff in that test tube as you're heating it, things can go real wrong real quickly. And also molten KCl. We had a teacher who got a burn on his hand from that molten KCl, and that would suck. So treat it with respect. And it's important as an example to be demonstrating safety for the kids. I'm laughing because there's all these times I screwed up. I'll tell you this story. Don't tell anyone. I'm sure statute of limitations is up on this. But it was like my first year in Chicago or something, and I was doing the whoosh bottle, which is when you take like, I don't know, is it a 5-gallon water jug or something? Drop a little methanol in there and light it, and it goes whoosh. There's a flame that shoots out. Well, one of the problems is you can only do it once conveniently without filling up with water and dumping it back out because it uses up the oxygen. So I found an oxygen cylinder in the back room of the school. And I was like, well, I'll just dump some oxygen in there. And then, so I did, and I put the methanol in, and then I set it on the heater to vaporize as much methanol as possible. And so I had it on its side. I don't remember why, but I lit that sucker, and it was like a nuclear warhead went off in that room. And I was just like stunned, in shock. There was silence. And then like a couple of kids started crying, and I was just like looking around, and the water bottle was gone. And I was just like,
did it just explode?
No, it shot across the room. But like when you're stunned from a very close explosion, I was just looking around and I was like, it's gone. This is it.
You're like, do all the kids have eyebrows? Like what happened?
I know. Yeah. And so it had shot across the room and flattened a metal garbage can.
That is insane.
And the principal came running down. He's like, oh my gosh, what was that? And
well, that's like, where you're like, that was divine intervention that hit a garbage can and not a student.
Right. Like, again, without a doubt, because that could have been a career ender right there. And it was all dumb on my part. So maybe when you're starting out, stick to demos that are well established.
I will say I always was the most nervous about the whoosh bottle. It just, it makes me jump. I didn't like that one. So
I haven't done it since then, but I should, because it's a good demo.
Should you?
The dumb thing is, like the demos, and this is something to think about too, like when I'm talking to new teachers, the demos that I find most interesting are the ones that people care about the least. Like one of my favorite demos right now is when we're doing chemical reactions. And so I'll take a big beaker, like a 1 liter beaker, put in some baking soda and dump in some vinegar. And they know that it's the volcano reaction and it produces CO2. And then what you do is you pour just the CO2 into another beaker and it looks like you're pouring nothing. And then you pour that into another beaker and it really looks like you're pouring nothing, and they're rolling their eyes. And then in another beaker, you have a candle and you dump in that CO2 and it puts the candle out. And it's like so much going on in that, like gases are fluids and carbon dioxide is more dense than air and it displaces the oxygen and you can't see it, but it flows. So anyway, like I find that fascinating. And then there's other ones like, you know, a good one, which is the methane mambo, where there's like, you bubble methane gas through solution of soap water and it makes this big like column of methane bubbles that you can light, and it's just like poof, there's a big fireball. That would be great. The kids would love that.
That's awesome.
Seen it too many times doesn't impress me anymore, but it should. And I should be doing those. So as we're looking at things to avoid like questionable. It's cool to have shock value. It's cool to act cool, but especially starting out, stick with known stuff and double down on safety. And I'll tell this story too, which is I think this was probably after you. Did you know Morgan Miller or no?
Mm-mm.
She's actually a chemist in one of the breweries in Kentucky now. But I did the self-carving pumpkin, and there's variations of this, but I do it around mole day, and I'll carve out the shape of a mole on the front of the pumpkin, and then I carve out the bottom, and I'll put a little container of water in, and I'll throw some calcium carbide in, which then decomposes to, well, it doesn't decompose. It's double replacement, I think. You get acetylene gas. And it's kind of a relevant thing in Kentucky because that's how the lights on miners' helmets used to work back in the day. They strapped the thing on, and it's got the little reflector with a little box behind it. And all they had to do was put water in there and drop some calcium carbide in. And then the acetylene would come out the hole in the front and then mix with oxygen, and you get that flame. And they could refresh that all day because there was tons of water or whatever. Well, things go wrong if you have oxygen getting in there or whatever. It's very explosive. But like when it's a container full of acetylene, that's great. There's no problem. And when it goes out slowly, it mixes with oxygen, and that's very controlled. But anyway, when you got a pumpkin full of air and acetylene, you light it through the back and it's just kaboom. And so I leave that, I cut out the shape of a mole, and then I cut it out in such a way I can put it back. So then when it explodes, it shoots this mole shape out.
That sounds amazing.
It's loud.
A flying mole across the room.
Well, but here's where this story goes is like one of the first years I did that, I was like, oh, I'm going to get the blast shield out for these kids as a joke. But I kid you not, if that chunk of mole didn't hit that blast shield and tip it over right in front of a girl. And it was like, and like the beauty of this entire scenario was somebody, and this was, I don't know, we'll just say 2008. So this was pre like the prevalence of cell phones. Somebody had some like ghetto cell phone recording going on. And so I've got that. In fact, I've got it up on my YouTube page where it's like nothing, kaboom. And then you hear some screams and then the camera just cuts off. Anyway, nobody got hurt, but I, as a joke, put the blast shield up and it saved a girl from getting hit in the face with a chunk of pumpkin.
So did you use it every year after that?
Oh, yeah. And a little tip for anybody who does there's variations of it, but smaller pumpkins work better. So I got greedy for several years and I couldn't get it to work right because I went with bigger pumpkins. Doesn't work, period. You got it. Smaller pumpkins are better. So anyway, basketball size, approximately. Keep that. Anyway, so labs and demos, that's what's going to rope the kids in. And well, there's a lot of setup in advance and tear down after the fact. Lab days are kind of relaxing because you aren't doing all the sweating. Like you are moving around and hustling, but it's hands-on for the kids. And then do something meaningful with the information they gather. And I have a lot to say about that. So we'll just say like, do something meaningful.
All right. What do you have to say though? I want to hear.
Well, like there's a lot of labs where people just have like 5 blanks to fill in or whatever. Like, I think it's more important that they synthesize some information with at least writing a conclusion or something. And then like the structure of conclusions I feel is important, but this is definitely one of those situations where nobody should care and nobody should be listening. You know what I mean? And definitely don't be comparing what you're doing to anybody else who's been doing it longer, because your job is to keep your head above water. I'll say this too, like, here's a mistake to make. Get on the freaking AP Chem Facebook page and start reading what those people are doing. I had to turn it off because it makes me feel so bad. Makes me feel so self-conscious after teaching it for like 15 years. It's like, oh, I'm horrible. These people care about all these things. Look at all the things these people are doing. Well, maybe one person out of a gajillion is doing most of those things. But the reality of social media is you're seeing one person who's doing one thing and another person who's doing one thing and another person who's doing one thing. But in your head, you turn that into a single person who's doing all of them. Yes. So like if you want to avoid something, realize nobody's perfect. All these people who are doing amazing things are doing one amazing thing. And the image you're creating of someone who's doing all of those things is a downward spiral for you. And I am sincere in saying, like, man, I have to mute that whole, because I'm crazy. Like I don't leave the group. Just every time a post pops up, I mute the group for 30 days.
That's exactly. I had to snooze it because I only liked to search for ideas when I had a specific thing, because I felt the same way. I felt so ill-equipped and it made me feel stupid. Like it made me feel like I did not know enough to teach the subject, right? Because people would talk about all these things that I had no idea what they're talking about, or they'd be like, oh, are y'all teaching this to this depth? And I was like, I don't know what they're saying, like about photosynthesis. And I'm like, I don't think they need to know it in that much detail. They're not botanists, but
amen.
So yeah, I agree.
Just note that like, I feel that way too, to the point that I can't even read those posts. It's like, it makes me too self-conscious. So avoid those. Like there are great resources. I like exactly what you said, which is get on, search for the resource you need, grab it from the files, and freaking flee the ship, get out of there.
Right. Like I need help with stoichiometry, search stoic, and then evacuate.
I got some good videos on stoic, Rebecca.
I can't wait. I'm going to link them and I'm going to watch them. I love stoic. That was my favorite part.
Is it? Well, I will say this. One of the reasons I was making the videos is I feel like a topic like stoic, I teach totally different than anybody else. Like I have this idea of haves and needs and laying it out in a very clear way. And that's like the traditional way of teaching stoichiometry is like, take whatever starting amounts you have, calculate all the way through to products, and then compare. And whichever one you have less of is the one that's limiting reactant. I think that needs to be done a lot earlier. And it's like infinitely more helpful once you get to solution stoichiometry. So anyway, part of the reason I was making those videos is to put things like that out there. And then like, so that I could freaking timestamp the stuff I'm doing when other people are taking credit for it. But anyway, so I'm pretty proud of those stoichiometry videos. And then there's some geometry videos that I really think, again, it's stuff that's interesting to me now that doesn't matter. so don't listen to anything I say, but like things that have really started to fascinate me are like all the intricacies of geometries and intermolecular forces and things like that. Where in the beginning, I think I was too busy keeping my head afloat to even notice that. But now it's like, all right, I've seen all that other stuff. Oh, here's some neat stuff that is really the determining factor for all the other crap I teach.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, but don't get, if you're early in teaching it, don't get caught in the weeds. Like
nothing. Bare bones. No one's going to notice. Do you remember me sucking horribly to the point where I didn't even want to come in?
No.
Okay. And they're not going to remember either. So, all right. Sorry. We got another bullet item. My big thing was make use of existing material, do demos and labs within reason. And then the biggest mistake you can do is start comparing yourself to everything else that's out there.
Yes, that's so true.
The people you need to compare yourself to are other people trying to stay afloat. And that's not a criticism. Saying, again, I speak a little bit in hyperbole, but like the reality is it's you needing to stay afloat. And if you're going to compare yourself to anybody, well, don't even compare yourself to anybody. Are you alive? Are you going to come back tomorrow? Good. You're doing what you need to do.
You're doing a great job. And it's just a job. That's like
right.
My anthem, I feel like on this podcast is like, this is your job. It's not your life. And it should not be your entire life.
All right. Maybe you should have told me that like 20 years ago.
I didn't know then.
Okay. Well, I haven't figured it out yet.
Okay. So thinking back to your first few years in the classroom, just in general, doesn't have to necessarily be chemistry specific. What would you go back and do differently?
Well, I think, and I wrote this down as like, what would be an area of strength for me would be utilizing more and inventing less. So like if I could change something, which in my heart, I'm like, well, I'm not going to do that because I didn't like that stuff anyway. But for a new teacher, what should be done is utilize more and invent less. You don't have the time to be inventing everything from scratch. You don't even have the time to be revising crap significantly. Just get it done. And I'm not preaching mediocrity. I'm preaching like we're in a situation where teaching is not a great environment. And like it's important just to keep going.
I agree. I think I always used to think of it like on an A, B, C, D, F grading scale, and I have to make an A. And it's like, no, this is a pass-fail course. Like you just need to pass.
Right. Well, that's a good point. Yeah. Yeah. And again, I have to say this. I had said this whole idea of brokenness and like people who are pleasers and low self-esteem. If you're thinking about these things, then you're going to be fine. It's the people who aren't thinking about these things who should be, and they're the ones who aren't going to be fine. So if it's the people who are listening to this podcast or seeking out materials, who are the people who are going to be fine because they're conscientious. I remember early on an administrator doing an evaluation. He was talking about and I don't remember the details, but he's like, there's 3 levels of competency. There's consciously competent, unconsciously competent, and unconsciously incompetent. And he's like, you're definitely unconsciously competent. And that has stayed with me because I've realized there is no such thing. To be competent means you have to, to be super neurotic competent, you have to be analyzing every little thing all the time in real time. And you can't do that unconsciously, at least not at a high level. I think you could probably coast unconsciously, but so if you're worried, you're fine. And I'll tell you this, like emails. Oh, did I put that piece of freaking advice in here?
You got to tell us. I want to hear what you think about emails because I have strong opinions.
All right. Well, hold on. Well, one of the pieces of advice that I wrote down somewhere here was don't have your email linked to your phone and don't check your email outside of school. And I know I'm kind of cranky because especially within the past 5 or so years, our administrator would send out announcements at night that was important for the next day or on Sundays. And I stand by my statement and I give people a hard time. I'm always like, didn't know. And I tell first year teachers, don't put it on your phone. And I'll tell you why I personally do that is because one email can ruin an entire vacation or it can ruin an entire weekend or whatever. And it shouldn't do that. And like you said, you need to get out. Like your life is not teaching. Why should you be pinned to it 24 hours? You're not on call for these people. So.
Yeah, I say that all the time. I say, my sister is a much more important person than me, and she makes 10 times the amount of money I do. She's a vascular surgeon, and she holds people's hearts in her hand, and she's not on call 24/7.
Represent Sarah, right?
Yes. Yeah.
All right. Yeah, exactly. So that's one of the biggest pieces of advice I have for new teachers is don't have your email on your phone because it chains you down, and one bad email can ruin your day, at least for me, or your entire vacation.
Yeah, me too.
So The other thing I was going to mention about early on, and even into maybe like 10 or 15 years in, is just like the way I handled unruly students or kids who were turds in the hall. It happens. And I wish I had been less aggressive about it. And this may just be a guy thing, but like part of it is, somebody mouths off or whatever, and you want to respond back or you want to try and reason with them. And what I've realized is like they're acting out emotionally and you can't reason with it. Mm-hmm. So defuse things a little bit. And we have this thing that is tardy tables.
Is that school policy?
Well, at the beginning of our planning block, we have 15 minutes where we have to stand there and escort tardy kids to class and like scan them in with a barcode. And over time, I turned this into like kind of a way for me to make positive relationships with students who are universally a pain in the butt for administrators. Because it's like, I don't have them in class. I don't have to be the bad guy. I can just talk to them normally on the way to class. And I might be the only positive interaction they have that day. So I say it because it's kind of like a game to me, but it's true. It's like, I might be the only positive interaction they have. I'm not giving them a hard time for being late. I'm just like, oh, what class you going to? Oh, what do you got going on this weekend? What'd you do? So, and I've met a lot of kids that way. And the same is true. Like vaping is very popular in the bathrooms or,
it was just old school cigarettes back when I was in high school. You used to always go in there and clear everybody out.
Exactly. Well, now it's vaping. And I think I was more aggressive about it previously, but now again, and I know it sounds horrible, it's kind of like a game to me. I'll walk in and be like, all right, go vape somewhere else. or just give it to me. We haven't met. Just give it to me and you can walk. I don't care.
I would get in trouble with admin at my first job because I did not care about dress code. I was like, as long as they're not naked, I'm just glad they're here. Like, I just want them to be in class. I'm not going to send them to ISS because their spaghetti strap isn't an index wide, index card wide. I don't care.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I agree on that too. Although it's like hypocritical of me to be like, oh, we need to follow the rules. And then I'm like, screw the freaking dress code. It's not worth my time. Especially now, like fashion is currently like freakishly short shorts and crop tops, like coming back from COVID. It was all crop tops. So I walk around all day looking at the ceiling because I don't want some kid like filming for TikTok, a teacher accidentally looking at them. So that's another thing to be neurotic about. So less aggressive. And this is something you have little kids. So, like if they go to daycare or whatever, they'll always send a note home like, one of the friends bit your child and left a huge welt. They don't say like this kid, it's friends. So I'll always be like, when these kids are screwing on the hall, I'll be like, friends. And the thing is, they have to feel dumb about getting mad when someone's not like, hey guys, get out of here. It's like, my friends, dear friends. Man, you have to make it into a game.
It confuses a little bit.
I've met some cool kids that way and I've had some good experiences. And there's always kids who are going to cuss you out, but not responding, because that's what my instinct is, not responding smartly, or that's my instinct, or not trying to reason with them, just remaining quiet. That's the way to go. So there's a little life advice.
Yeah. Someone told me once that parenting is just the whole point of parenting is to be the calmest person in the room at all times. But I think about that with teaching too, is like, I would take things so personally and it had nothing to do with me.
I'm trying to tell myself that. That's wisdom. Why couldn't you have told me that 20 years ago?
I'm sorry.
Write that down, everyone.
Okay. So tell me though, I want to hear about classroom management. You kind of mentioned it with like diffusing people. And when I think back to your class, I think of you as such a expert classroom manager. And maybe you didn't feel that way, but I feel like chemistry is really hard, but people just enjoyed being in your class. Like you said, I think back to my junior year prom date, and he may not have been the most stellar student, but he really respected you.
Vinny.
No, that was senior year. It was Justin.
Oh. He's a good guy.
Yeah, but you were great. You connected with him as a human.
Right.
And so, yeah, I just would love to hear your advice on classroom management and individual behavior issues, maybe, or anything on that. Because I think it's really hard and it's really intimidating for a new teacher.
Big time, especially I think as a new teacher or a new teacher of a content area, when you feel like you suck, because you do. And then some kid like that means you're very sensitive in that area. And then some kids like hitting that hot button. Yeah, that's hard. So there's a few things, and I wrote down a couple. And since I have become a parent, it rewires the chemistry in your brain. And I'll say this as a joke, but like it's kind of true, which is you get dumber. My IQ drops every day. And it has to, because any sane person would not raise a child, because children are a pain in the butt. Your brain, the chemistry has to change in your brain, because otherwise you wouldn't do it. So,
so true.
So back to your original question, handling things more subtly. Like, I think early on in my career, I was more aggressive about just calling kids out in class about whatever. So I fall asleep at faculty meetings now all the time. In fact, one of my coworkers sends me pictures of myself asleep at faculty meetings. She thinks it's hilarious, and so do I, actually.
I want to get on that
like,
group
when kids
text.
fall asleep in class, I think that's kind of changed for me. And now I'll just have another kid nudge them, or I'll be like, hey, stand up. And that's a small thing. And I'll tell the kids too, like, I'll treat you as pseudo adults if you can behave as pseudo adults.
Mm-hmm.
But if you can't, then we're back to kindergarten, and that's how it's going to go. And I'm lucky, like, older kids are better about handling responsibility and not screwing up, and me just being like, oh, can I go to the bathroom? And I want to tell them, don't ask, just go. Don't come back. Come back. Don't screw up. And that's what I'll usually tell them. Don't screw up, right? This bathroom here, don't screw up. But, and this jumps down to another bullet you had. So the student respect. So I want to tie these two together. Something I've really emphasized lately is that it's a team effort. So when a kid is missing a bunch of work or they're failing, they'll feel ashamed very often, and they won't want to talk to you about it, and they'll feel stressed about that. So I'll grab them, and I sincerely say, like, your stress is my stress. I look at your grade and it's stressing me out. You look at your grade and it's stressing you out. What can we do to make us both less stressed? So, and that's why, so I say, your stress is my stress. And then I had also said, like, and I think it's important to make clear to them that my opinion of them as a person is independent of their grade. Like, you're a great dude. I know you can be successful. You're missing a bunch of stuff, and it's stressing me out. And it'd be nice if we could both be less stressed.
Well, and I think we can't expect everyone to, like, love our subject or, you know, be into it. It's just, it doesn't make sense, especially when you're teaching, like, every student has to take biology to graduate. So it's not, they didn't choose to be there. And so I can't, like, put this pressure on them.
Right. And it's not like they're all going to go into chemistry or science or whatever. And this, like, if anybody's going to pencil anything in that I say, here's what I tell the kids, and I feel it's so true. Like, what you're going to do in this class is learn how to learn new things and learn how to keep up with a consistent workload. Those are 2 life skills, and we're going to learn some chemistry along the way. Like, learning how to learn is the skill that decreases every year. And as a parent, you can attest, like, you don't want to see your kids uncomfortable, right? But sometimes they need to be uncomfortable. They need to be outside their comfort zone, because that's how they learn. And, like, for instance, like, your kid gets burned or whatever, and it's like, oh, I don't want them to feel that pain. But guess what? They're going to learn about burns, right? So it's really, really hard as a parent to let your child be uncomfortable, but that's how you learn. You have to be able to work outside your comfort zone. And especially with the higher level kids, they're not used to not being successful, because the standards are set so low. They've never had to study. They don't know what it's like to not know something. And so, like, learning how to learn is this big skill I work on. And, like, my class or a math class, chemistry or math, is where they really hit that wall of, I can't just walk in and do it. I have to learn new things. I have to put time in. And it's interesting that kids know, like, if you're an athlete or you're a musician, you have to practice every single day. Yet when it comes to school, they've never learned that. Like, if you want to get better, you have to practice. That takes discipline, and it takes discomfort and everything else. And it takes failure, right? You're not going to always, you know, make it over every hurdle as you're running, whatever, 110. What's the hurdles in a track? I don't know.
You know, I don't do sports. I have no idea.
Well, look at me, sports ball. So anyway, you're not always going to succeed at everything. You're not going to play a piece perfectly the first time. You have to make everything muscle memory. And that's another thing that I've really impressed a lot is muscle memory. You don't have time to be thinking, how do I do this? Like, this stuff is too complex to just sit down and know it, or sit down and figure it out as you go. It has to be muscle memory. You sit down and I say grams, and in your head, you're immediately saying, I'm going to turn that into moles, because that's what you do every single time, right?
I still have so many molar masses memorized. Like, I could tell you so many of the elements, because I remember you saying that in AP Chem, like, you're not going to have time to constantly be referencing this. And you're right. We did it so many times that I could just move quickly. Like, I can still tell you, I can tell you to 3 decimal places, pretty much the majority of the periodic table. And I have not thought about that on a regular basis, but that's because of you.
And it's all about muscle memory. And I say, like, there's kids playing a violin. I was like, if I picked up a violin, you would cringe at the way I'm holding it, but you don't even think about it. If I tried to pick it up and pick up the bow and use it, it would be an alien and you would like rip it out of my hands. But for you, you don't even think about it. You pick it up and put it in that place. Well, that's how your studies need to be in terms of these content areas. And I do want to be careful here so that everybody knows I don't encourage anybody memorizing the periodic table.
Right. It wasn't like you quizzed us on it. It just happened because of how we were using it. But okay, so I have a question based on what you said. How do you deal with those parents then when they're get to your class and they're like, well, this is the first time my kid's ever failed. And oftentimes the kid has like a B. They're not even failing, but the parent's freaking out because it's the first time they've ever not had 100 on every single thing. That is like such a stress point. And so what would you be your advice on that?
Well, let me tell you, that was hot button highlighted on my notes because I get it all the time and it's only getting worse. Like they are not used to their kids being upset and these kids aren't used to not knowing. And it's so frustrating. And I understand, like it's heartbreaking. You do have to work outside your comfort zone to grow. There is a limit to what's healthy. And I have to be the one who sets that limit, especially if the parents won't. When the parents are like, oh, my kid spends 5 hours a day on chemistry. And I want to be like, well, then you're a crappy parent because you need to cut it off at an hour and whatever happens, happens. So like, that's a big deal. And what I had put on here was like, especially I joke about bio all the time because it's like super easy and there's no numbers. So take that as hyperbole, all you stressed out people out there. But quantitative sciences are hard, period. Mm-hmm. That's something people don't realize. It's hard. And if you were to talk to people, these kids' parents, or perhaps the generation before them, they will inevitably tell you, chemistry was the first C I got, or chemistry was the only B I got. And that's how it is. Well, that's not acceptable anymore to these people. And that's super, super, super frustrating. So one thing that I will say is if you can drag them along, or if you can find a way to get them to transition, a big reward for them is they feel like they've accomplished something. How many times have you sat through whatever class? I'll just name names like what you sat through
organic chemistry. Studies. Biochemistry.
No. Other way around. You sat through social studies and you got done and it's like, I haven't done anything. Or they'll come out of a test and be like, I just wrote 5 pages and nothing. And there's no sense of accomplishment in that. Whereas like you complete a big stoichiometry problem and it's like, wow, I have something to show for it. I created something. Mm-hmm. So if you can teach them like the satisfaction in creating something, there was nothing there before. Now there is something. You walk in the classroom. What are we going to do today? Something. They were gone last time. Did we do something last time? Hell yeah, we did something last time. When is the last time we didn't do something?
So true.
Every day. That's when we do something. So working outside the comfort zone, super important. And I think part of that too, and this all overlaps, is like, it's the buy-in. The students have to buy in and you have to buy in to their lives. And so like I do at the beginning of the year, half page, write a half page about you. If you're doing it for another class, then just turn that in. I don't care. What does it have to be about? I don't care. And I'll tell them, I read it and I take notes. And so then I'll refer to these things and it's like, oh, I saw this on your half page. You're like, 6 months into school. I'll be like, oh yeah, how's track going? How'd you know I do track or whatever? It's like, well, you put it in your half page. I read that. And I try to make it to like a sporting event or something. And it's not critical, but this is something to think about. It's like buy in. Mm-hmm. I'm telling you to buy into what I'm pushing. I'm going to buy into your life. And I'll tell them, it's like, look, I hate sports. I'm going there to support you. That's the only reason I'm there. I hate plays. The arts, that's a freaking pyramid scheme. But I'm going to go to your boring play. I don't necessarily tell them boring, but sometimes I do. And I'm going because of you. I'm not going because I like it. And I'll start class with like, and I didn't know that this mattered, but I had a couple kids recently who were like, oh, the best part of class was starting out when you'd be like, oh, does anybody have any news of interest or interesting things?
Yes.
Which is just me playing a game of like, I'm going to burn some time and then I'm going to play the game of I'm still going to cover everything I need to. So kids like to get you off track. And I tell them like, look, we're going to cover whatever we need to. You can burn as much time as you want.
I loved your news of interest though. That really was so enjoyable.
It's weird because I don't have a problem if a kid's like, oh, we got a track meet this weekend, or oh, we had a track meet yesterday. And it's like, oh, what's your event? And they'll be like shot put. And I'm like, oh, what's your record? Who won? Blah, 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 blah. I don't have any problems talking to a kid and then everybody can listen in, Like, I think that's kind of important is one-on-one communication with the kids as they're walking in about things that aren't school, about things that they may not necessarily know that you know about. And it's difficult. That's a dangerous game to play by saying those words. But man, if you know everything about a kid and you can let them know, it's like, oh, hey, how was work last night? Or, you know what I mean? Because you saw them there working. And then you'll tell them, oh, well, I saw you out there. Then all of a sudden you're on their radar. It's like, what's it? This person recognizes me and knows I exist. So I think that's important in terms of classroom management, developing relationships with students. And I will toss this in there before I forget. Quantitative science is hard. Quantitative things are hard. But something, especially I think, as my brain chemistry has changed, parenting, is kids will be in a situation, and I'll tell parents too, like, look, there's things more important than chemistry. And I'll tell them, don't tell anyone I said this, but there are things more important than chemistry. I don't care. You focus on that. And I've developed this like analogy, which is I tell them that you have a pie chart of time in your life. And a certain amount of that pie chart is sleep, and a certain amount of it's time at school, and a certain amount of it's time after school. And there's time required for traveling and everything else. And if there is some significant change in your life, like something even as simple as a pet dying, that takes up some of the space on the pie chart. And then the space you had before, the time you had before, was what it took to get an A. Well, now some of that time's gone. An A is not feasible. If you try to chase an A, you're going to lose space and lose space and lose space. Like this idea of mental health, like mental health has to be the top priority, followed by physical health. Every morning on the announcements, the principal will be like, make academics your top priority. And every morning I would say out loud to the kids, mental health, top priority, physical health, second priority. But like, it's a downward spiral, because when a kid isn't getting an A, like maybe their pet died and they're not getting an A. And this is like a ridiculous example, even though it's true. Having had a pet die recently, it's very hard. Then they get on themselves. I'm not getting an A. And then that amount of cognitive load increases in the pie chart. And then their grade goes down even more. And then their grade goes down even more. So helping kids to not internalize by saying there are things beyond your control and they're going to affect your grades. And you need to not look at that grade as a reflection of you. Don't internalize it. And similar to that kind of is like when you got a kid failing who's saying like, oh, it's just, I'm lazy. You think I'm lazy. And it's like, no, you hold down a part-time job. I don't think you're lazy at all. You can hold down a job. That's a real world skill. It's like, we just need to, you just need to do something to, get a grade in this class. It doesn't have to be your top priority. You are not lazy. You don't necessarily care about chemistry, and that's fine. Take your ability to learn new things and take your ability to keep over the consistent workload, which you already have. You're holding down a job, and then everything else is going to fall into place. So it's not easy, but it's easy to say those things.
I was just going to say, I feel like that's so important for teachers too. Like your mental health and your physical health is the most important thing. And when you have other things, like you said, eating into your cognitive load, like you have a life outside of school, shocker, then that's going to impact you. You just have to do the best you can in the circumstances you have with the capacity you have at that moment. And that capacity is fluid and it's changing based on what's going on.
Why didn't you tell me that 20 years ago? It's ironic that like I can tell the kids this, but I can't internalize it myself, which is like, and I've been working very hard on like, not everything has to be perfect. Sometimes things suck. Sometimes people are going to be mad at you and they're going to stay mad for a bit, or they're going to think you're inadequate, but that's life. Those are words that I would like to be able to utilize. Quite clearly, teachers are expendable. So we're not supposed to think about those things. We're just supposed to be burned out and tossed aside. So, but you are 100% right. It's just that I think society is like, you're the whipping boy and like, I'm mad, I'm having a bad day, I'm going to take it out on you, and your administrator is going to help me. And that's bad. And it's only going to get worse as there are fewer teachers and more people. They're more desperate for administrators, and they'll take lower quality administrators who don't know necessarily how things actually are in the classroom and who aren't as good at mitigating what parents want and say. It's going to get worse. I don't know that it's going to get better, but it's going to get worse.
I feel like admin makes such a big difference in the quality of life you have with your teaching job.
1,000%. Anyway, very quick, the square. So like 2003-ish, and everybody has this problem where like kids are falling asleep in class. And this is somewhat hyperbole, or they're like not paying attention. They weren't on their phones because phones didn't really exist back then. And so if somebody was falling asleep, I would just have them stand up next to their desk. Well, one day or one class, I had this kid who would just like then sprawl across several desks and fall asleep, or they lean on the desk or whatever. And so I decided, well, I just need to put them far enough away from anything that they can't lean on anything. And so then I came up with the idea of a square, a little timeout place. So then it's hard to fall asleep. And so I do have to be very careful, as you mentioned earlier, in terms of like timeout and parents getting offended. So I do my best when I'm going to give a kid a hard time or something. that they know that I'm doing it out of love. And I'll tell them, like, just because I say I'm doing this out of love doesn't mean it's okay. But anyway, kids who can handle it. And I think that that's a big thing, semi-related, is like, if I could change over the course of my careers, I feel like I've ruined so many kids by giving them a hard time because I like them a lot, but them not being clear on that. My wife always tells me, she's like, well, people don't know when you're joking. So like, I feel like every time I give a kid a hard time, I'm like, you do realize that I think you're awesome. P.S., you're an idiot. So if I could change something, I would be more clear early on with kids that, I'm just giving you a hard time because I like you and I know you can handle it. So in terms of the square, those are the kids who go there. You've been in a classroom, you know exactly who can deal with something like that. It's not really a mode of punishment, except for good kids who never get in trouble. It's a way for them to, no consequences, get in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
So
I was the first one in the square in AP Chem. I'll never forget, because I wouldn't stop talking to Mush. And you told me, if you speak to her one more time, and I asked her for like a pencil or something, and I got sent to the square.
To the square. Right. So
do you still have the one in the hall?
Well, like, I made that into a game, which was like, I would tell them, go stand out in the hall. There's a dot out there. When you find it, you can come in. And there used to be a dot, but now there's not anymore. And I just tell them to go out there. And you have to be really careful with that kind of stuff too, because like administrators, there's a kid outside of your supervision or whatever. Hopefully everyone's ignoring everything I have to say. All right, let me just skim this real quickly.
What about, maybe anything about AP Chem or?
Oh, yeah. All right. Well, the biggest thing I had to say about AP Chem is, number one, you're going to suck. Number two, pretty much everybody sucks. That's why the national average is like 2, right? Mm-hmm. So do your best. Practice exams are the biggest things that I can tell people. I have a lot to say about College Board. That could be its own podcast. Not a fan, not happy with how they try and dictate curriculum. They are not objective in how they do it. They have tried to distill things down, and in the process, people then follow them blindly and cut out what I feel is important content, like nuclear chemistry, like colligative properties, melting point, increasing boiling point depression. So anyway, a lot of stuff there. But I will tell you, the most effective thing that I've done, practice exams. Basically, second semester, each week I'll give them a free response portion of a test or a multiple choice portion of a test. They take it, and I tell them, take it under time constraints. What you need to become familiar with is what it feels like to not do 100% on a test. If you can aim at 50, if you can walk out of this test having gotten a 50%, you pass the AP test. You're not used to feeling that way. You need to know what it feels like. So the practice test I'll put in as a grade. Like, let's say it's a 60% or a 60-point multiple choice test. I'll put it in the first time as we work our way up through the semester out of 30 points. If they can get 30 points on it, cool, they get full credit. If they get 40 points on it, they still get 30. So it takes away some of the incentive to cheat as well.
I like that.
And then what I'll do is they can retake them as many times as they want until they get the score they want. So what I'm trying to impress upon them is learn to work with the constraints you have. And then it becomes like a life skill, which is, hey, I'm identifying what I don't know. It's the ones you got wrong. And I'm finding ways to work around it. And then I'm going to improve. So like I tell the kids, if you do what I tell you, you will be successful, right? Like take the practice test. What you get is what you get. Figure out what you did wrong. You can take it again. There's no stakes in that. Don't game it. And so practice tests, I think, are one of the most important things. Mm-hmm. They have to get familiar with what it feels like to not know stuff. So they're not going to give up. And they have to, it has to be muscle memory. When they see this type of question, they do this type of thing. And then, on the multiple choice, especially, like you can't memorize all the answers, but you can certainly learn ways to approach types of problems if you go back and try, which you have the motivation to do if you know you can bring your grade up. So, and I filter that into all the categories.
Yeah, the AP bio test, I feel like, is almost like a reading comprehension test. And so it's that, like you said, that practice is so important, just because they'll try to throw in all these distracting off-topic things to make you think, well, my teacher didn't teach me that. But the question has nothing to do with the content. It's about analyzing the graph. And so it's just answer the question or answer the prompt. So we always say in AP bio, ATP, answer the prompt.
Oh, good. I like it.
And that practice, though, like you said, with the time constraints, that's the other thing. They see that ticking clock. And if they're not used to working under pressure, and like, just, you can leave stuff blank in the free response and just skip it and answer what you know.
Right. And you got to teach them. I don't know if it's true on the bio, but on the AP Chem, they can, like, let's say it's a problem that's got 5 parts. And in the first part, you have to calculate something. If you calculate that wrong, you can use the wrong number for the rest of the problem and get all the other points. So that's something that a lot of the kids don't realize. you'll lose that the first time, or maybe you don't even know how to calculate it. Just put like, I don't know how to do this, but I'm going to use 15 from here out. So you lose points on that part, but you can get full credit on the rest of it for using the wrong number correctly.
Wow.
So it's little things like that. And then, so I also have them, and this is partially laziness on my part, we score the free responses in class. They'll score their own, and eventually we work to scoring other people's. And that ends up being shockingly effective because they see what they did wrong and how the rubric is going to judge them. And also they see the type of answers other people put and how the rubric judges them. So I think that like that free response practice, and they can game the system. All the answers are online. Although I've got several of the American Chemical Society multiple choice tests, which answers are strikingly absent online. And that's a great equalizing factor. And I'll tell them like, look, you get a 60 on this first multiple choice test we take out of 60. I don't believe you.
Right.
You get a 45. I don't believe you.
Yeah.
So, and
I love
think
that putting out of less points. That takes the pressure off, like you said, to cheat. Because you're, like you said, for AP, it's all about like, you got to learn.
Right.
You got to do it to learn.
Right. And so I increase the stakes a little bit so that they have the motivation to do better. All right. So how much time do we have? Like 6 minutes?
5 minutes. I want to know, is there anything you wish bio teachers taught differently? What did we do wrong and you get these kids in chem and you're like, you learned that wrong?
Well, luckily, most of the bio people in my department have been so verbally beaten down by me. And it's kind of a joke. But again, they didn't realize I was joking. So now I have to tell them. I will tell you like the two most common things, or at least the most common thing is the whole ATP breaking bonds gives you energy, which I don't know if anyone still makes that mistake, but textbooks still have it wrong. If you want to break something, it requires energy, right? Like you don't get energy by breaking bonds. You use energy to break bonds. And then you get more energy back when those things go and form more favorable bonds. It's like, if there's a concept that they could highlight there, I really like that our AP teacher works in some molarity, touches on molarity. I think that's cool whenever the kids see it. It's neat whenever there's overlap on that kind of stuff. We'll mention ligands. Chemists say ligands. Biologists say ligands. Right? It's interesting. But it is the way it's done. So anyway, in terms of biology and everything else, lab reports, I think it's cool if they can start to work on lab reports, come up with conclusions. I have a sign in my room that says more writing does not mean more right. So that's something that just because you wrote a bunch doesn't mean it's what we want to see. And I tell them, the more you write, the less I believe you. So I like when the biology people like work in a work ethic, consistent workload, lab reports, and then like that whole breaking bonds thing, because that's.
How do you balance grading labs and homework, especially like chemistry is a subject that you need to practice, like you said, with muscle memory. So how do you balance grading all that?
Oh my gosh.
Or do you just not? So I don't grade it all, but I want to know what you do.
Okay. So first of all, in terms of grading, it's so easy once you have multiple choice or with Canvas, all these online opportunities to have kids submit stuff and it's done. I'm not a fan of that. I notice how I censored that as politely as I could. Chemistry is process oriented. The process in math and science and engineering is usually more important than the answer, because if someone has the process, then anyone can look at it and figure out what happened. And that's why I think it's so important to lay things out. Well, if you have a multiple choice answer, you don't know what the kid could do. So like tests and everything are a hassle to grade because there's partial credit. Over the years, I've made like rubrics, and every year I have to make a new one because every year I revise tests because I'm so crazy. But like, I'm very lucky, and I wish we had more than a few minutes to talk about this. I'm very lucky. I had student aides who were willing to work for free, and they did a lot of that. And usually I just have them spot check homeworks, and I still have them do that because you can tell whether someone put forth the effort or didn't. You can look at a page. This is the bare minimum somebody could have done to do it legit. And then it's like, wow, this person's an overachiever. So I'll have them spot check stuff. Tests and labs, I have detailed rubrics that they can follow. And they're all kids who've taken my class before and have been through it themselves. So they have a pretty good idea what to look for and everything else. Student aids had evolved, and I don't know when, into these peer tutors who you get a grade for it. It's an advanced credit and you get a grade for it. And so I kind of take that seriously. In the beginning, I think it was pretty serious. I think a lot of people kind of have diluted it to peer tutors or student aids. But like, especially as I get older, I get more narrow in my vision. So I tell these guys, like, you've sat in this classroom, you know what could be better and how, you know ways to approach problems that would have been better or that helped you. Tell me, right? And I think, again, synthesis is so important. I'll be like, here's a handout I want, make it. And it's really hard for me as like a kind of neurotic person to let go of that control. It's like, whew. But I have to tell myself that these are all top students. Who in the world has a workforce composed exclusively of like the best in the building?
Mm-hmm.
And they're going to think of things that I can't. They're smarter than I am by orders of magnitude. So they can think of things I can't. They're better at communicating with their peers in the way things are presented than I am. I still make 2 spaces after periods, and you can pry that from my cold, dead hands. But so like, I need to make use of that, and I need to accept that there's going to be validity in other ways to present things. That's really hard for me because I'm so set in my ways, but I'm trying to lean more and more on them in terms of giving them freedom to do stuff and then accepting what they give me. But, telling them like, hey, here's where we can make improvements. Here's where I really like it. That's hard. And delegating is really hard. Mm-hmm. But again, the short answer to your question is rubrics. Mm-hmm. But the other thing is like, I really feel like this is a great opportunity for me to grow because I don't like being outside of my comfort zone, and having smart kids who I know are competent and have skills and being able to delegate to them is like, I don't know, very important.
Teacher's aid program is the best. I like that peer tutor, but I've never been in a school that didn't have some form of that. And I was one in high school for Miss Waspy. So I have a blog post I'll link about that. If anyone's listening, they're like, what's a TA program? Your school needs to implement it. That's what you need to do.
Yeah.
It's a free way your admin can help teachers.
Right. And again,
why wouldn't they do it?
Exactly. And it's self-selecting in terms of you're not going to take kids who are wasting time. And like, this is a big deal. It could be its own podcast, is like, delegating is so hard for me anyway. And in your mind, you picture it as this is going to free up all this time. Well, and I tell people this all the time, you delegate it, it's going to save you 20%. You're going to have to explain it. You're going to have to go back through it. And it's not going to be exactly how you want it, but you have 20% more time than you did.
Right.
And this is a growth opportunity for somebody else. So like, part of why it's so hard is you don't get what you picture in your head, but also it doesn't save you that much time. However, it can be a good growth opportunity for everybody. So delegating is hard. That's a skill I would like to have learned earlier on. Trusting other people's judgment, right? And utilizing kids' strengths. So
I love that. Okay. Anything you want to add before I ask the last question?
No, I think we hit all my highlighted items. So what do you got?
Okay. So last but not least, I ask every podcast guest one way you've simplified your life recently. Can be anything, doesn't even have to be classroom related. But just since the podcast is called Secondary Science Simplified.
I already spoiled that because I had put that in red in mine. That was, don't check your email outside of school. I think that's great. That is an important life hack. And it's so hard now that administrators have this expectation that you're going to be checking your email, that you're going to get their emails. Don't. You have to draw the line somewhere. And especially when we went into virtual learning and everything else, the days blurred, and it was like very hard to draw the line on when you should be responding and when you shouldn't be responding and all this other stuff. There have to be lines. Boundaries have to be drawn. I can't do it, but you can.
No, everyone can do it. I had a hard time doing it until I had a friend who was a school counselor, and she said it actually can be a legal issue if we get in the habit, because then if you see something and you don't respond, right, then it could come back on you that like you were aware that this student was having a mental breakdown and you didn't respond. So it's actually legally safer to completely disconnect and be able to say, I don't check this after hours.
Right. And parents don't like that. I if we had time, I would tell you a couple horror stories, but I did have one parent emailed over 100 times in 1 year, and we're on an 8A BD schedule. So I only saw the kid every other day, which is craziness. I got to the point where I would only respond once per day. On average, I send about over 1,000 emails per year. I respond to over 1,000. I keep all my emails very well sorted. It's important for like the future and everything else. So I keep all the sent emails. I don't delete. Outlook keeps track of all that. So I think that's important too, is good email handling. Being professional. Like the kids are always like, oh, you sent me this email and it was so professional. Yet in class, you're completely incompetent. It's like, well, it's in writing, right? I have to act professional in writing. So because those things can come back, the laws are that like any parent can request any correspondence with their kid about their kid. So there's always things to look for there.
And I always encourage teachers too. Like if a parent if you only have their phone number, I call them and ask for their email address, like first thing, because I want all the correspondence in writing. Because once you've had one parent cuss you out on the phone, you never want it to happen again.
Right.
You can cuss me out in writing, and then I can forward it to my admin.
Right. And then your admin can just roll their eyes and move on with their lives.
Does your voicemail save in an email voice memo? Because that was my favorite, when you get a voicemail rant from a parent and then I could just press the FF button, send it to my admin and feel like, what do I do?
No, but that is technology I need to look into. That's
You got to get
brilliant.
that feature. Yeah, it's the best. Well, seriously,
Wow.
I cannot thank you enough for sacrificing some of your summertime. And
I'd talk all day if you let me.
I'm going to have you back. So just be prepared for me to reach out again.
All right. Well, we can plant this seed of, I will tell you the two worst stories of my career in terms of frothing parents and lacking support from administration.
We'll circle back, because I really do want to hear more of your thoughts with admin, because I know that's really hard when teachers are in a situation like that. So be expecting to come back.
Awesome. Well, Rebecca, as you know, I'm beyond proud of you. I look at your posts every day, family posts and work posts, and I think, wow, how are people so competent? And how can children be so lovely? That's your children.
They are lovely for now.
How can this parent make me feel so inadequate as a parent? So,
well, I'm grateful for you. You're still one of my all-time favorite teachers, you and Waspy. I talk about you all the time. So I'm grateful.
Well, that's awesome. I appreciate it. And do remember, like, if that's something to remember, I was doing a horrible, horrible job when you came through.
Seriously, that encourages me.
And you didn't even know it.
I had no clue.
I feel guilty every day about how I cheated all those kids.
And we turned out great.
Yeah, you turned out amazing.
And now we're having you on our podcast.
Yeah, well, that's bad taste on your part. So.
Well, seriously, thanks.
All right. Well, anything you need, holler at me. You can check out Matson Chemistry on YouTube. So
yes, I'll put.
I've got a whopping 200 followers.
Thanks so much for listening to today's episode. I hope you learned as much as I did from my interview with Zach. Make sure to check out his YouTube channel, Matson Chemistry, for more from him. And I will, of course, link it in the show notes, as well as my blog post about having a TA program at your school. And you can find all of those links at itsnotrocketscienceclassroom.com/episode 35. I had so much fun talking with him, and honestly wish we had had more time, because I really wanted to hear more of his thoughts on working with difficult parents and under challenging admin. But unfortunately, on our interview day, I ran out of babysitter time, so we got cut off. But I'm planning on asking him to come back again to talk with me more on these topics. So if you agree that would be helpful for you, DM me on Instagram at its.not.rocket.science and let me know. Also, if there's ever a specific topic you want to hear about, please DM me and tell me. I started this podcast to serve you, and I can do that best when you tell me what you need. Also, if there's a guest you would like to hear from, tell me, and tell me what you want to hear from them about. I do my best to bring in a variety of educators to fill in the many gaps of where my experience lacks. And I'm hoping to continue doing that to serve you. And I am willing to put my neck out there and ask literally anyone, no matter how famous they may be on the Teachergram. So if you have a guest interview request, just reach out and let me know, and I'll do my best to see if they're willing to come on. Remember, I am here for you. All right, teacher friends, that wraps up today's episode. If you're looking for an easy way to start simplifying your life as a secondary science teacher, head to itsnotrocketscienceclassroom.com/challenge to grab your classroom reset challenge. And guess what? It's totally free. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll see you here next week. Until then, I'll be rooting for you, teacher friend.